He left her because she didn't fit his future. Now she owns the jet he can't afford to board. He chose power over parenthood. Now she's a billionaire, with 4 children who carry his name but not his memory. She was once the woman he erased to protect his image. Now she's the headline, and he's not even a footnote. He thought walking away was strategy. Watching her soar without him, that was the real verdict. From single, pregnant, and penniless, to CEO, jet-setter, and mother of 4 heirs to an empire. Malik Harrington was the youngest federal judge in the country, a man built by image and political backing. But when his black wife revealed she was pregnant with quadruplets, he chose ambition over love. No warning, no mercy, just gone. Now, years later, she's not just surviving, she's soaring, with his legacy walking beside her and not a trace of him in her empire. Hi, beautiful souls, this is Dr. Phillips. Please tell us what country you're watching from. And in case you're new here, please don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because here at Love and Twilights, we bring you the best stories in the world. Watch until the end, because this isn't just a comeback, it's justice with receipts. Now let's begin. The heat of the DC sun shimmered over the private hangar, casting faint waves above the pavement. Malik Harrington adjusted his cufflink as the town car door shut behind him. His aides followed silently, briefcases in hand, eyes scanning the line of aircrafts for his scheduled transport. Then he saw her. It felt like time slipped out of gear. The staircase to the jet framed her silhouette like a memory painted in flesh, elegant, poised, and familiar in a way that ached. Her dress moved with her body, subtle and strong. Her hair curled down her back, and in that instant, he wasn't a judge. He was a man who had made a choice. Liana Monroe. And the child on her hip? That child had his eyes. He blinked once, twice. The rush of ambient sound, the whir of engines, the click of heels on concrete, vanished beneath the weight in his chest. A little girl tugged at Liana's dress. "Mama, can we have the cookies now?" Behind her, a boy clutched a tablet, deeply focused. Another girl adjusted her sunglasses with a miniature grace that mirrored her mother. And the 4th child, the youngest looking of the bunch, was mid-sprint toward the jet stairs before turning to call, "Come on." 4 children. Quadruplets. His quadruplets. Malik's throat tightened. He felt as though someone had reached into his chest and squeezed. She didn't look in his direction again. She simply gave a soft nod to the pilot, adjusted the strap of her bag, and ushered her children aboard. The door of the jet sealed shut with a hiss. He remained frozen in place. His aide leaned toward him, whispering, "Judge Harrington, your jet is the falcon behind this one." But he barely heard it. His eyes stayed locked on the polished fuselage she had just disappeared into. Malik turned slowly. "Give me a minute," he muttered. He stepped away from his team, seeking shade by the hangar wall. His phone trembled in his pocket, a reminder of appointments, speaking engagements, expectations, but none of it felt real anymore. It had been 4 years since he walked out. No word, no updates, no trace of her in his life since the day he signed those papers and told himself he was making the responsible choice. She hadn't just survived, she had become something untouchable. He had told himself that she would struggle without him, that she'd regret her pride, that, in time, she'd reach out. But she didn't. Not once. And now she was walking on tarmacs with 4 children, in perfect rhythm, no hesitation, no need for him. Malik had delivered life-altering judgments in courtrooms that brought hardened criminals to their knees. But nothing, not a single gavel, not a single verdict, felt as damning as that moment. Back in the car, he gave no instruction. He sat, stone-faced, staring at his own reflection in the tinted glass. His assistant, still unsure what had just occurred, opened her laptop beside him. "Sir, you're scheduled to open the conference in 90 minutes. He gave a shallow nod. "I'll be ready." But he wasn't. His mind drifted, racing through snapshots he had tried to bury. The night she told him she was pregnant, her hands trembling slightly as she held the ultrasound, trying to smile past her fear. The look in her eyes when he chose strategy over love. He had been a coward cloaked in conviction. In court, he was known for demanding accountability. But outside, when the stakes were personal, he had chosen escape. He closed his eyes. Behind them, her face lingered, older now, refined, but radiant in a way ambition could never replicate. And the children. He couldn't shake the way they moved. Like a unit. They were hers. Every inch. His only contribution had been absence. He gripped the armrest, knuckles white. Back at the hangar, her jet lifted off with a gentle roar. He watched the trail of it vanish into a blue sky that mocked him with its clarity. Inside, he cracked open his laptop and typed one name: Liana Monroe. Dozens of results flooded in, not from social media, but from press, tech articles, business journals, women's magazines, entrepreneur spotlights. Mother of 4, builds $150 million tech company from scratch. From homeless to CEO, Liana Monroe's rise is rewriting the game. She didn't just break the mold, she made a new one. Every article painted her as revolutionary, visionary, soft-spoken, driven, and brilliantly unconventional. And in none of them, not even once, was his name mentioned. Not even as an afterthought, not even as history. He scrolled further, clicking on a photo of her stepping out of a hotel in Milan. One child in her arms, the other 3 flanking her like royalty. Her hair was wrapped in silk, her dress minimal but commanding. His eyes burned. Malik leaned back in the leather seat and closed the laptop slowly. His voice was hoarse when he finally spoke. "Reschedule my evening meeting." "Sir." He didn't repeat himself. He stared out the window, the echo of his past vibrating louder than any applause he'd ever received from the bench. For the first time in years, he realized something terrifying. He hadn't just lost her. He'd erased himself from a story that continued without him. And that story? It had turned out far more beautiful than the one he had chosen. Before Malik Harrington became a federal judge, he was simply a rising star, a polished graduate from Columbia Law with a mind that moved like lightning and an ambition even faster. He had been raised to play a perfect game. His father, a diplomat, and his mother, a legacy professor, had shaped him into an image of poise and poise only. Emotions were private, mistakes were unacceptable, and appearance was everything. The world saw Malik as flawless. He knew that was the point. Then, one spring evening in Manhattan, everything changed. He had been invited to speak at a diversity and tech fundraiser, barely listening as people buzzed around him with talking points and martinis. He moved through the event like a figurehead, smiling on cue, keeping his thoughts guarded. He was prepared for donors, speeches, and politics, not for her. Liana Monroe wasn't on the program. She was there as a last-minute PR fixer, stepping in for a client in crisis. She wasn't the loudest woman in the room, but she was the only one who didn't care who he was. When they were introduced, she said nothing about his resume. She looked at him with calm challenge and said, "You've got the posture of a man who hasn't exhaled in months." Malik had blinked. She sipped her drink, tilted her head, and added, "Maybe try breathing. It helps." He'd laughed, real laughter, the kind that surprised even him. They talked and talked. One conversation spilled into the next. He canceled his next meeting, then his ride. By the end of the night, they were walking along the East River, trading life philosophies like secrets. She was raw and brilliant, unfiltered in the way that only someone who knew their worth could be. She spoke of building her PR agency from a laptop and a borrowed couch in Atlanta. She talked about loving language and strategy but hating masks. "I don't do faking," she'd said. He was fascinated. She made him feel something he couldn't quite name, a version of himself that was still human, not just crafted. Their love was fast, but it wasn't shallow. By their third date, they'd debated justice systems, kissed in the rain, and stayed up until sunrise listening to jazz in his apartment. Malik had fallen. Hard, but he hadn't fallen cleanly, because from the moment he introduced her to his world, there was friction. His colleagues smiled too tightly. Their compliments held strange pauses. His mentors asked casual questions that didn't feel casual at all. "She's sharp," one said, "but maybe a little bold for the kind of image you're cultivating." Liana noticed it too. "You know they're not actually curious about me," she once whispered to him after a political gala. "They're just trying to figure out where I fit in your story." He'd kissed her cheek and told her it didn't matter. But slowly, it began to. He started avoiding events where her presence would raise eyebrows. When the press wanted a quote about his bachelor charm, he played along. Liana asked once, gently, "Am I something you're proud of, or just something you hide?" He hadn't known how to answer. He told himself it was strategy, that keeping her out of sight would protect what they had. But the truth? He wasn't strong enough to stand between her and the whispers. The turning point came one afternoon in their Brooklyn apartment. She had just landed a contract with a national fashion label, a major PR win. She was glowing, dancing barefoot with a glass of wine, humming as she pulled him into a kiss. He smiled, distracted, his phone lighting up with a message from a campaign backer. "You're not even here right now," she said, laughing. Then more seriously, "You never are anymore." He apologized, said it was just stress. Then she said it. "I'm pregnant." She held out the ultrasound image with both hands. Malik's stomach twisted. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "How many weeks?" he asked. 6, and it's 4. Quadruplets. His heart stopped. He stepped back. 4? She nodded slowly, gauging his expression. His silence told her everything. "You're scared," she said. He rubbed his face. "You don't understand the kind of pressure I'm under. This changes everything." Liana put the sonogram down. "No, this changes everything for the better, unless you think I and our children are the problem." Malik didn't respond. That was the moment the line cracked. He didn't yell, didn't fight. He just shut down. The next morning, she woke to the sound of a suitcase being zipped. He didn't look at her. "You're ashamed," she said softly. Still, no answer. She stood still as he left. No hug, no goodbye, no explanation, just the echo of a door closing behind a man who'd been her world. The man she gave everything to, the man who chose perfection over presence. From that day forward, Malik Harrington never spoke her name again. He buried it like a mistake. And in his carefully manicured biography, she became nothing more than a chapter he never read aloud. The day Malik signed the Judicial Fast-to-Track Fellowship, everything felt pristine. There were congratulatory phone calls from senators. His mentor called him a generational talent. Even the New York Times ran a short feature. He was 32, already clerking for the federal bench, and on pace to become the youngest district judge in a decade. Everything was aligning, except for one thing. He hadn't told anyone about Liana. She didn't fit into the campaign portfolio being built for him. She was brilliance without polish, blackness without apology. She didn't network, she disarmed. She didn't pitch, she spoke her truth with a confidence that made donors uncomfortable. They didn't say it out loud. They didn't have to. His handlers began to ask questions like, "Is this relationship serious? And have you considered what this will look like at confirmation hearings?" He hated those questions, but he hated how much they echoed in his own head even more. He began distancing himself, quietly, strategically. When Liana noticed, she didn't rage. She simply looked at him with those eyes that saw too much. "I don't need to be part of your brand, Malik," she said one night, "but I deserve to be part of your life." He had no rebuttal, because in his world, a black wife carrying 4 children wasn't just personal, it was a potential liability. He never said those words. He didn't have to. She felt it every time he omitted her name in interviews, every time he introduced her as a friend, every time he promised, soon when the time is right. Then came the final straw. She'd planned a dinner, cooked his favorite, lemon herb sea bass with garlic couscous, candles lit, jazz playing. Malik arrived late, phone pressed to his ear, his suit still carrying courtroom tension. He barely acknowledged her, waving at the food as he took another call on the balcony. When he finally came inside, she was sitting silently at the table. He frowned. "I told you I had a meeting. Why are you upset?" "I'm not upset," she said. "You're not speaking." "I'm listening," she replied, to how loudly silence answers questions. She slid a manila envelope across the table. Inside was a printout of the latest donor briefings from his campaign consultant. Underlined in red was a sentence that read, "Candidate remains unmarried, focused on the bench." He looked up. "You told them I don't exist?" she asked. He sat down, staring at the paper. "I didn't write that, but you didn't correct it either." Her hands trembled. "Do you know how that feels? To be erased before I'm even fully seen?" He sighed, tried to reach for her hand, but she pulled back. "I thought love was supposed to be louder than fear," she whispered. He didn't know how to respond. His mouth moved, but the words weren't brave enough to cross his tongue. Later that week, they had another doctor's appointment. She was now 7 weeks along. Liana was glowing, excited, despite everything. She tried to hold his hand in the elevator. He kept his inside his coat. Inside the examination room, the doctor smiled. All four are progressing well. Strong heartbeats. Liana beamed. Malik managed a tight nod. But the moment the word quadruplets was mentioned again, his mind raced. The headlines, the implications, the spotlight. On her, on them, on him. He excused himself. He stood in the hallway, gripping the railing, feeling the walls closing in. Not because he didn't love her. He did. But love didn't feel like enough. Love wouldn't save him from what the public would say. That night, he didn't go home. He booked a hotel suite under another name. The next morning, he returned to the apartment before dawn. Liana was asleep on the couch, wrapped in his old hoodie, one hand resting protectively on her belly. He stood there, paralyzed, then quietly packed his bag. She stirred as he zipped it. "Where are you going?" He couldn't look at her. "You don't understand the world I live in," he said. "I don't have to," she replied. "I just have to be loved in it." Her voice cracked on that last word. And still, he walked out. His driver didn't ask questions. Malik sat in the back seat, watching the buildings blur past, wondering if it would hurt less tomorrow. It didn't. Days turned into weeks. He ignored her texts. When the final legal documents arrived, he signed them with a steady hand and a broken soul. The public never knew. The judge ascended. The woman disappeared. And no one ever asked him why his eyes were always tired. The apartment was too quiet. The air hung thick as if grief had settled into the walls. Liana sat barefoot in the middle of the living room floor, one hand resting on her stomach. The man she'd built her future around had walked out without even shutting the door behind him. The silence he left behind screamed louder than any argument ever could. The ultrasound photo lay next to her, edges curling, ink still fresh. 4 heartbeats, 4 lives growing inside her, and she had never felt more alone. She wrapped her arms around herself and let out a sound she didn't recognize, a low, shaking exhale that turned into tears. Outside, the city was indifferent. Horns blared, dogs barked, people rushed to places that had nothing to do with her world crumbling. She stared at the ceiling. The room still smelled faintly of him, his cologne, his soap, the aftershave he always kept beside the sink. She wanted to scream, but her voice was buried under the weight of betrayal. The next day, she checked her account. He'd canceled the joint access. No more safety net, no backup plan. She called her former assistant, trying to restart her PR firm. But in the time she'd been away, the industry had shifted. Her clients had moved on. Referrals had dried up. She'd poured everything into Malik. Because he said she didn't need to work. He said he'd take care of them. Now she had no income, no health insurance, and 4 children growing inside her. Even her landlord, once sympathetic, became cold when the rent fell behind. The eviction notice came 3 weeks later. Liana packed what she could. A suitcase, a blanket, the ultrasound photo. The rest stayed behind. She returned to Atlanta because it was familiar. She had friends there, or so she thought. One by one, doors closed. Her old business partners were restructuring. Her college roommate just had too much going on. No one wanted to deal with a pregnant woman carrying quadruplets and no prospects. She found a room for rent above a laundromat. It smelled like detergent and mildew, but it had a door that locked. She started applying for jobs. Too many employers saw her belly and smiled apologetically. "We'll keep your resume on file." Some didn't bother responding at all. She finally landed a job waitressing at a 24-hour diner near the edge of the city. She worked the graveyard shift, midnight to 8, because no one else would take it. Her feet ached. Her back screamed, but she smiled when customers called her darlin' and left a few extra dollars. During the day, she napped on the floor of her tiny room and wrote press releases for small businesses that paid pennies. She told herself it was temporary, that she just needed to make it to delivery, but the weight of it all crushed her slower than any one blow. It was the steady erosion of hope that hurt most. One night, after pulling a double shift and walking home in the rain, her legs buckled as she climbed the stairs. She collapsed. A neighbor called an ambulance. The hospital was bright, the sheets starchy and white, the machines humming a rhythm of panic. The doctor frowned as he reviewed the monitor. "You're carrying 4. That's high risk already. Add the stress, the lack of rest, the diet." He didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need him to. She already knew. When the nurse handed her a cup of ice chips, Liana tried to smile, but her lips were cracked, her hands trembling. In the middle of the night, hooked to monitors and IVs, she curled into herself, one arm protectively wrapped around her belly. "I'm sorry," she whispered to the children she hadn't met yet. "I'm trying." Her voice cracked. "I don't know how much more I can do." Tears slipped down her cheeks. Not loud, just steady. That's when she heard the voice. "You sound like someone with something to build." Liana looked up. A nurse stood in the doorway. Her badge read Amara. She had kind eyes and long braids tucked beneath a navy scrub cap. "I've seen your kind before," Amara said, stepping inside. "Not the broken, the rebuilding." Liana blinked, unsure whether she was imagining the woman. "You're not done," Amara added. "You're just at the part of your story where the audience holds their breath." Liana stared at her. "You've been waitressing and freelancing, right?" The nurse asked casually, glancing at the chart. "You ever thought about tech?" Liana scoffed. "Tech? I can barely afford Wi-Fi." Amara smiled. "We got a community tech center 5 blocks from here. Free classes, free childcare, and people who don't ask what your past was, only what you're trying to do next." Liana didn't respond. Not right away. She watched the machines blinking beside her, heard the thud of her baby's hearts. "I'm tired," she finally whispered. Amara nodded. "Then rest tonight. But tomorrow, you fight again." And for the first time in weeks, Liana didn't feel like she was drowning. Just floating, suspended in a space between who she had been and who she might still become. She whispered again to her belly as dawn crept through the blinds. "I won't break." The next morning, Liana did exactly what Amara told her to do. She got up, not because she felt better, not because she believed anything would change overnight, but because something inside her had shifted. Maybe it was the nurse's voice. Maybe it was hearing 4 distinct heartbeats inside that hospital room. Or maybe it was the exhaustion, the kind so deep you surrender to it just to find one reason not to quit. Whatever it was, she got dressed, tied her scarf, and stepped into the morning air. The community tech center wasn't much, a refurbished rec room tucked behind a church and a daycare. Fluorescent lights flickered above a wall of used laptops and plastic chairs. But to Liana, it was the first room in months where no one looked at her like a burden. The program coordinator, a woman named Trina, introduced herself with a handshake and a stack of forms. No condescension, no forced smiles. Just this: we meet you where you are. We teach you what you want to know. No judgment, no debt. Deal? Liana nodded. "Good," Trina said. "Let's get you logged in." It wasn't easy. Her first week of classes felt like learning an alien language. HTML tags blurred in her head. JavaScript syntax mocked her from the screen. Algorithms felt like math's meaner cousin. But every time she wanted to give up, she thought about 4 names she hadn't spoken aloud yet. She whispered them on breaks. Nova, Nia, Zion, Zeke. She didn't know who they'd become yet, but she refused to meet them with excuses. Between coding classes, she worked shifts cleaning office buildings. The kind of jobs no one saw. Offices emptied by 5. She arrived by 6. She wiped down keyboards, scrubbed bathrooms, and collected trash while listening to YouTube tutorials through borrowed earbuds. Some nights she barely slept. Still, she returned to class. Every click of the keyboard felt like reclaiming a part of herself. She wasn't rebuilding her PR firm. She was building something new, something hers. Her first mock project was a landing page for a fake fashion brand. She stayed up 2 nights straight styling fonts and testing color codes until the instructor said, "Looks like we've got a designer in the making." Liana didn't smile right away. She wasn't used to compliments anymore. But when she got home that night, she looked at herself in the mirror and whispered, "You're learning. You're not losing." By the 2nd month, she started helping the woman next to her, a mother of 2 named Kendra, who was learning Excel and WordPress to start a blog. "Your spacing is off," Liana said gently, pointing to her screen. Kendra grinned. "Look at you, boss mama." Liana blinked. "Excuse me?" "That's what we call you now," Kendra laughed. "You show up with that belly, hustle harder than the rest of us, and still take notes like you're running your own startup." Liana didn't know how to respond. She just shook her head and muttered, "I'm not anybody's boss." But deep down, the name lodged itself somewhere near her chest. It felt possible. The tech center became more than a classroom. It became community. When she needed prenatal vitamins, someone brought extras. When she couldn't afford fresh fruit, A volunteer stocked a fridge and labeled it Liana's Cravings. And when she broke down one morning after class, tears silently soaking her notebook, no one asked why. They just sat with her until it passed. The love was quiet, steady, unlike anything she'd known before. In her 6th month of pregnancy, Liana completed her first full project, a tool that monitored social media trends for small Black-owned brands. It wasn't flashy, but it worked. She designed the UX herself, styled the code with clean functionality, and used real-time data. Trina looked at it and said, "You know you could actually pitch this, right?" Liana blinked. "Like, to investors?" Trina nodded. "Or incubators, or people who want to fund tools that matter. This thing has legs." Liana swallowed hard. No one had told her she'd built something with value in a long time. It terrified her. And thrilled her. She hesitated. "I don't have money to launch anything, or marketing experience in this space. You're standing in a room full of women who know hustle," Trina said. "We'll find you what you need." And just like that, a plan began to take shape. Not tomorrow, not in some fantasy, but step by step. She bought a used laptop with her saved-up tips, started building a cleaner prototype, used free trial software to run early demos, and all the while, her belly grew. 7 months in, walking became harder. Sleep came in short, uncomfortable intervals, but she never missed class. Because by then, it wasn't about survival anymore. It was about legacy. When the contractions started, she was at home, reviewing JavaScript event handlers. She thought it was just cramps, until the pain stole her breath. The ambulance arrived fast. So did the urgency in the nurse's voice. "High risk, multiple births. We need a surgical room ready." Everything after that blurred. She remembered a ceiling full of lights, the chill of the OR, a voice counting down, and then silence, until the first cry, then the second, then the third, then the fourth. 4 separate wails, each cutting through the air like they were announcing themselves to the world. Liana cried too, not from pain, but from something deeper, relief, awe, power. In recovery, the nurse wheeled over the bassinets. "Meet your team," she smiled. Liana stared at them. 4 tiny humans, faces wrinkled like paper, lungs working overtime, fingers curled into fists. She didn't speak at first. She just reached out. Nova, Nia, Zion, Zeke, all present, all healthy, all hers. The nurse leaned down and whispered, "Boss mama, you did it." Liana smiled through tears, not because she was whole, but because she knew the difference now. Being whole didn't mean never breaking. It meant rebuilding yourself, piece by piece, until your reflection finally looked like someone who deserved to win. The early months were brutal. Liana's tiny apartment buzzed with life and noise. Crying, feeding, changing, rocking, rinse, repeat. Her body hadn't yet recovered, and sleep came in 20-minute increments. But she refused to complain. Her children were alive, healthy, and watching her, even if their eyes were barely open. She wore 3 hats every day, mother, coder, and hustler. The crib doubled as her office desk during the day. While Nova napped in the bassinet, she wrote code with one hand and bottle-fed Zion with the other. At night, she laid Nia and Zeke on a yoga mat beside her as she ran test functions on her web app. She knew now. Balance wasn't about ease. It was about adjustment. Phoenix Analytics was the name she gave her tool, a trend analyzer for Black-owned businesses. It wasn't flashy, but it spoke to a real need. It helped smaller brands understand what content was gaining traction, when to post, and how to ride cultural moments. All from a dashboard Liana designed on a refurbished laptop she got through a tech grant. Her friends still didn't know the full story. Most had assumed she'd gone off the radar after Malik left, and she let them. She didn't have time to explain. Her life was no longer a tragedy in progress. It was a mission in development. By the time the babies turned 6 months old, she'd quietly launched the app in a few niche Facebook groups. It started slow. Then a Black-owned vegan bakery in Detroit used the tool and posted a 43% increase in engagement in 1 week. They shouted her out in a post. Then a boutique in Charlotte messaged her, "Can we use your app too?" Then came the referrals. Users doubled in 3 weeks. Liana hadn't even built a subscription tier yet, but the demand was already bubbling. She didn't celebrate loudly. No champagne, no social media announcement. She just kept building, She updated the back end, reconfigured the user experience, answered every support email personally. She did all this while warming bottles, reading bedtime stories, and folding onesies during app deployment. Kendra, the woman from her coding class, dropped by one afternoon to help watch the babies. She looked around at the scattered notes on the wall and said, "Girl, you running a whole tech startup in a 2-bedroom apartment, you know that, right?" Liana laughed. "I'm just trying to make sure Zion doesn't chew on my charging cables." "No, seriously," Kendra continued. "You've got something real here. You ever think about hiring?" Liana paused. Hiring? The thought hadn't occurred to her, but it stayed with her. That week, she sent out a message to the Tech Center alumni group, looking for part-time virtual assistants. Remote, flexible hours, must be resourceful, bonus points for moms. 7 women replied. Liana hired 3. She trained them herself, built a workflow, created SOPs on Google Docs, and issued their first payments through a small business banking app. They called her boss Mama. This time, she didn't flinch. She accepted the title with a quiet nod and a deeper breath. Boss Mama wasn't just a nickname. It was an identity. She wore it like armor. Every decision she made with 4 tiny reasons sleeping beside her. She wasn't chasing revenge. She wasn't chasing headlines. She was building because she couldn't afford not to. Some nights, she cried. Quietly. Never in front of the babies. When her hands ached from typing, or when customer service requests flooded in at 3 a.m., or when Nova had a fever and the site glitched all at once, she questioned it. But then Nia would fall asleep clutching her pinky. Or Zeke would giggle mid-burp, and something would click again inside her. This isn't just survival anymore. It's legacy. 3 months later, Phoenix Analytics hit 10,000 active users. Still no public funding, no launch party, just results. Word spread. A freelance journalist covering tech for underserved communities reached out for an interview. Liana agreed, but under one condition: no photos, no personal background, just the product. She wasn't hiding. She was choosing silence over spectacle. The article published under the headline, "Anonymous App Helps Black Businesses Rise. Who's Behind It?" The mystery only added to the traction. Emails flooded in. Requests for interviews, demos, even acquisition offers. She said no to all of them. She wasn't ready. Instead, she focused on building a better onboarding system, adding features based on real feedback, and making the tool mobile responsive. One day, while feeding Nova and reviewing analytics, she got an alert on her phone. New York Business Weekly had featured the tool in a segment titled Top 5 Minority-Owned Tech Tools to Watch. They didn't know her name, but they knew her work, and that was enough. Later that night, Liana stood at the tiny kitchen window, looking out at the Atlanta skyline. She pressed her hand to her chest. She wasn't finished. Not even close. Success didn't roar. It whispered, then echoed, until people couldn't ignore it anymore. That was exactly how Phoenix Analytics grew. One review, one repost, one community leader mentioning the tool in a Zoom webinar. The snowball didn't come from headlines, it came from trust. Liana didn't chase press. She refined performance. She built new data visualizations for her users, added analytics summaries for brands that couldn't afford marketing agencies, designed templates for seasonal trends. Every update was tested with real users. If it didn't help, it didn't stay. Within 8 months, Phoenix Analytics was operating in 12 states. Liana, still in her 2-bedroom apartment, ran morning team calls with women from Detroit, Houston, and Philly, most of them mothers, all of them brilliant. She called them her digital army, and they called her boss Mama, not as a joke anymore, but as fact. Her leadership wasn't loud. It was intentional. She paid higher than average rates, let her team set their own hours, built systems that trusted them instead of micromanaging them. When someone had to step away for a sick child or an emergency, no explanation was needed. "I want this business to feel like a safe home for women who never had one," she said once on a call. The message traveled further than she imagined. One afternoon, she opened her inbox to find a message titled, "We'd like to feature you in a new series, Women Shaping the Digital South." It came from a journalist at Tech and Equity Review, a growing platform highlighting minority-owned innovation. Liana paused. She hadn't planned on being the face of anything, but her team encouraged it. Kendra said, "Your face might be the permission someone else needs to start." So, Liana agreed, but she did it her way. She wore a solid red blouse, no designer label, No fancy backdrop, just her standing in front of her dry erase board, arms crossed, laptop open, and Nova strapped to her hip. The piece went live 2 weeks later. Meet the Southern mother redefining what a tech founder looks like. It spread like wildfire. This time, not just in niche spaces. Major platforms picked it up. Podcasts sent invites. Micro-investors reached out. Her story landed where it always belonged, in the hands of the people who had once been invisible. One interview led to another. One article triggered a speaking invitation. A mid-sized tech conference in Miami wanted her on a panel. Disruption without permission. Liana said yes, not to shine, but to stake ground. The day she left for the conference, her children clapped as she walked out the door in her travel blazer. "You look like a TV lady," Zeke said proudly. She kissed his forehead. "No, baby, I look like your mama." She arrived in Miami with Kendra and 2 other team members. They didn't have a corporate suite or handlers. They had grit. When Liana took the stage, she didn't read from a script. She spoke about pain, about pregnancy and poverty and product-market fit, about building tools for people who'd been ignored too long. She didn't sound rehearsed. She sounded real. When she finished, the applause rolled through the auditorium like a heartbeat. Later that evening, she stood on the hotel balcony overlooking Biscayne Bay. Kendra handed her a mocktail. To quiet queens making loud moves, Liana smiled. To women who rise anyway. The next morning, an unexpected email came through. It was from a representative at a Silicon Valley fund that had previously rejected her 6 months earlier. "We see you. Let's talk." She didn't respond. Not yet. She had her own metric for success. She opened her dashboard instead. The Phoenix server had held steady during the conference, even with the spike in user traffic. Her team handled customer inquiries without missing a beat. That, to her, was power. Later that night, while the kids were fast asleep, she reviewed payroll, then checked in with a new developer intern in Chicago. The young woman, Aaliyah, was in her 2nd year of college, juggling night classes and helping her grandmother with medical bills. "I don't have much experience," Aaliyah had written when she applied, "but I work hard and I learn fast." That was all Liana needed. Aaliyah was already crushing her tasks. Liana sent her a bonus. She didn't announce it, didn't screenshot it for social media. She just sent it and wrote, "You matter. Thank you for showing up." That was the culture she was building. And it wasn't just growing, it was glowing. Phoenix Analytics reached 50,000 users by the end of the year. Liana finally hired a CTO, brought on a financial advisor, moved operations out of her apartment and into a donated co-working space offered by a Black woman-owned nonprofit. The babies were now toddlers, curious, chaotic, and full of personality. Nova liked puzzles. Nia loved colors. Zion always asked questions. Zeke was the giggler. Every day before starting work, Liana would gather them on the couch, press her hands to their tiny shoulders, and whisper the same thing. "Nothing about your beginning limits your future. You hear me?" They nodded, even if they didn't understand yet. But one day, they would. They would know their mother didn't just survive abandonment. She built an empire on top of it. Quietly, unapologetically, and loudly enough for the world to finally listen. The name had always lived in her, long before it ever lived on paper. Phoenix Tech. It wasn't just a company, it was a declaration. She filed the incorporation papers on a rainy Thursday afternoon. The babies were napping, her coffee was lukewarm, and her laptop screen displayed a simple confirmation: "Your application has been accepted." No applause, no celebration, just a mother in her kitchen. Changing everything. Within weeks, she transitioned Phoenix Analytics into Phoenix Tech, a full-suite data platform for Black and underrepresented entrepreneurs. No more side hustle energy. No more makeshift team meetings between diaper changes and support tickets. This was a tech company now, a real one, and it needed funding. She'd avoided venture capital before. The system wasn't built for women like her, Black, female, mother of 4, with no Ivy League credentials or insider networks. But she also knew something they didn't. She had the numbers, and numbers couldn't be ignored. So she created a deck, spent nights perfecting it while Nova slept on her chest and Zeke rolled toy cars across her legs. She rehearsed her pitch in the mirror, not to sound convincing, but to sound like herself. By the time she booked her first real pitch meeting, Phoenix Tech had 75,000 users, a 30% retention rate, and month-over-month growth that beat early-stage benchmarks. Still, the first 5 meetings didn't land. Some smiled too much, others barely looked at her. One even said, "It's an interesting concept, but are you sure this is scalable?" She didn't flinch. She just marked them off her list. The 6th meeting changed everything. The email's subject line read, "Mutual interest, not just capital but alignment." It was from a woman named Renee Morgan, former product lead at a major tech firm, pushed out after blowing the whistle on internal discrimination. Now, a silent investor focused on marginalized founders with real traction. They met at a coffee shop in Midtown. Renee wore no makeup, no jewelry, just a white t-shirt, jeans, and a face that didn't do small talk. "You don't need me to validate you," she said after 5 minutes. "You already built something they can't copy." Liana stayed quiet. Renee leaned in. "But I see what you're doing. You're not asking for a seat. You're building your own table." Liana finally nodded. Renee didn't offer $1 million check that day. She offered something more valuable, a 6-month advisory partnership, hands-on development support, and her entire contact list. Plus one promise: when you're ready for Series A, I'll lead. Liana shook her hand without hesitation. It was the first time in a long time someone didn't ask her to shrink. Phoenix Tech exploded in the months that followed. They rebranded the dashboard, launched 2 new tools, and introduced a beta feature, Accurate, an algorithm that analyzed visibility gaps for minority-led brands. The response was instant. Retailers wanted to partner. Universities asked for demo sessions. One day, after a virtual talk at a women's coding boot camp, a girl messaged her, "You made me feel like I didn't have to code in someone else's voice." Liana stared at that message for a long time, because she understood it. For years, she'd tried to mold herself into what was palatable. Now, she was finally speaking in her own cadence. She didn't soften edges, didn't ask permission. Her pitch to future investors became clear. "We make digital tools for those excluded by traditional data. We don't guess, we listen. We don't predict trends. We empower communities to drive them." Her confidence didn't come from ego. It came from proof. Phoenix Tech surpassed 100,000 users 6 months post-launch. The company was officially profitable. She expanded the team to 20 women, most of them hired from her original coding circle. Childcare stipends, mental health resources, and flexible remote roles weren't perks. They were policy. She was building what she had once needed. And people noticed. One day, her assistant forwarded a press request from a major business magazine. Subject line: "We'd like to profile the woman changing tech without apology." Liana read it 3 times. She didn't respond right away. She stood by the window, watching her kids paint clouds on construction paper. They wore oversized t-shirts and spoke in their own language of joy. They didn't know the world once doubted her. And now, that same world was preparing to write her name in ink. She agreed to the profile, but on her terms. The photo shoot happened in her home office. No designer shoes, no makeup team. Just Liana, natural hair in a twist, wearing a Phoenix Tech hoodie, sitting cross-legged on her couch, laptop on her knees, and her children drawing just outside the frame. The feature dropped with a headline that made her pause. She was told to stay quiet, so she built a company that speaks for thousands. By the end of the week, her inbox held more than press requests. It held partnership offers, platform integrations, acquisition proposals. She declined the buyouts. She wasn't building to sell. She was building to own. One night, after the twins fell asleep and the others were brushing their teeth, Liana sat on the edge of her bed. Her phone buzzed with congratulations. A voice memo from Renee. A thank you from a user. A photo from Kendra with her own new laptop smiling. "You made this possible." Liana closed her eyes. She thought of the day she'd collapsed in a hospital hallway, overwhelmed and overlooked. And she thought of now, seated at the helm of something alive. She whispered one word into the quiet. Rising. There were no paparazzi when Liana bought the jet. No champagne corks. No ribbon-cutting ceremony. No public announcement. Just a simple wire transfer and a soft click of keys in a private airfield office outside Atlanta. The jet was a Gulfstream G200. Not the flashiest, not the newest, but it was hers. Not because she wanted to flaunt success, but because she was done waiting for approval to move. For too long, every decision had been weighed against someone else's expectations. What she should do, how she should show up, where she was allowed to belong. That era ended the moment her twins started asking why TSA lines were always so long. Freedom. That's why she bought it. Freedom to move with her children. Freedom to be where she needed to be without rearranging her worth for boarding passes. The day it arrived, her 4 children ran through the hangar like they were entering a playground. Their laughter bounced off metal walls. Zion called dibs on the window seat. Nova took out her markers to decorate the safety pamphlet. Liana just smiled. The pilot, a retired Air Force officer turned private captain, approached her respectfully. "Everything's prepped, Ms. Monroe." She nodded. "Call me Liana." He smiled. "Yes, ma'am." The first flight wasn't business. It was something better. She took the kids to Costa Rica. No press, no work calls, no social media posts. Just waterfalls, coconuts, and sandy footprints on wooden decks. They hiked a forest trail, Liana carrying Zeke on her back as Nia named butterflies. At night, they lay beneath mosquito nets, reading stories and asking questions that made her heart expand. "Are we rich?" Nova asked one evening. Liana paused. "We're free." Nova thought about that for a second, then smiled like she understood. That was the real win. Back in the US, invitations began piling in. Global panels, equity summits, leadership features. She accepted a few, strategically, but only if she could bring the kids with her. If they couldn't come, she wasn't interested. No opportunity was worth compromising the family she rebuilt from dust. Her assistant knew the new rule by heart. If they want boss mama, they get all of her, including the ones who call her mama before anything else. The children became accustomed to airports, headphones, and coloring books on private leather seats. They each had backpacks with initials embroidered in gold. Zion packed books. Nia collected stickers. Zeke liked snacks. Nova, ever curious, carried a miniature camera. They were growing up with a different kind of rhythm, one where presence wasn't sacrificed for power. In the background, Phoenix Tech expanded quietly. A new hire in Paris. An office partner in Toronto. The user base crossed 200,000. But none of it made Liana feel as proud as the morning she walked into the kitchen and found her children role-playing. Zeke, wearing one of her conference lanyards, declared, "I'm in charge of the numbers." Nia said, "I'm the CEO." Nova raised her hand. "I'm the investor. I believe in all of you." Zion looked serious. "Can I be legal? Like, make sure the contracts are right?" Liana laughed, biting her lip to hold back tears, because without ever saying it, she'd given them a new blueprint. They weren't dreaming of escape. They were dreaming of ownership. And then came the trip to DC. A tech equity summit had invited her to deliver a keynote. Topic: building beyond the algorithm. It was supposed to be routine. Private flight, hotel, security detail, a quick speech, and then home. But fate didn't keep appointments. It made intersections. As the jet coasted into the private hangar at Reagan National, her assistant updated her itinerary from the front seat. "You're scheduled to arrive at the venue an hour early. Panel begins at 2. "Perfect," Liana said, already checking the kids' tablets and snacks. The door opened. The tarmac buzzed with a low hum of movement, luggage carts, service vans, and the occasional flash of sun off polished metal. And that's when it happened. A black town car pulled up nearby. A familiar figure stepped out. Sharp suit, measured steps, same posture he'd carried in courtrooms and campaigns. Malik. She froze, not from fear, not from emotion, but from memory. He hadn't changed much, still wore ambition like it belonged to him. But his face, he looked thinner, tired in a way money couldn't cure. Their eyes locked across the pavement. He stopped mid-step. There was no confusion in his face, just disbelief. The 4 children surrounded her. Nia tugged her sleeve. "Mama, can we have the cookies now?" Behind her, Zion adjusted his glasses. Nova was mid-sentence about her sticker book. Zeke sat on the last stair of the jet, swinging his legs like it was all routine. Malik's mouth opened, but no words came. Liana didn't flinch, didn't wave, didn't speak. She nodded to the pilot. "We're ready." He opened the door wider. She turned, gathered the kids, and boarded. Without looking back, from the cabin window she caught one last glimpse of Malik standing still, hands at his sides, face pale, his legacy watching him from a runway he didn't belong on anymore. She didn't gloat. She just exhaled. For the first time in years, it wasn't about what he saw. It was about what he finally couldn't touch. Her freedom, her family, Her flight. Malik didn't sleep that night, not even for a second. He lay in his suite at the Conrad, staring at the ceiling, tie still knotted at his throat, shoes on the floor where he'd kicked them off with more force than he meant to. He could still see her, clearer than any trial transcript he'd ever memorized. Liana Monroe, ascending the stairs of her jet like the past never touched her. Her back straight, her children close, her silence louder than anything she could have said. And those children, each one had a piece of him. Zion's eyes, Nova's walk, Nia's chin, Zeke's stare, the same way Malik once looked at a courtroom, like it belonged to him. He had missed everything. He opened his laptop, trembling slightly, and typed her name into the search bar. Liana Monroe. Enter. He didn't know what he expected. A social media account, a blog, maybe a glimpse of the woman she became. What he found stopped him cold. Article after article, features, headlines, press profiles. Tech visionary redefines data access for Black entrepreneurs. Meet the mother of four. Building a new digital future. The woman behind Phoenix Tech's meteoric rise. He clicked the most recent piece from Equity Edge. A photo loaded. Liana sitting cross-legged on a couch, laptop in her lap. No makeup, no filter. Nova was visible in the background, drawing on a chalkboard. Nia peeked into the frame holding a juice box. She didn't pose. She just existed. Fully. He scrolled further. Her company had reached over 200,000 users. She'd partnered with universities. She was building tools to combat algorithmic exclusion. And his name? Nowhere. Not even in the smallest font. He wasn't a chapter in her story. He was a footnote she never wrote. His heart pounded, a slow, aching tempo. He stood up, pacing the room, trying to make sense of it all. 4 years ago, she'd begged him not to leave. She'd held an ultrasound in her hands, believing in them both. And he'd chosen strategy. He told himself it was for the greater good. That timing mattered, that the world wouldn't understand. But now, the world did understand. And it celebrated her, without needing his permission or approval. He opened another tab and pulled up an internal federal memo. One of the documents had a list of keynote speakers for the upcoming Judiciary Tech Roundtable. He stared at the fourth name on the docket. Liana Monroe, founder and CEO, Phoenix Tech. He didn't realize he was holding his breath until he saw it. Her work was no longer whispering. It was sitting at his table. The irony wasn't lost on him. She had once stood in their Brooklyn apartment, asking to be part of his world. And now, she had rebuilt her own, stronger, richer, and with far more gravity. He closed the laptop slowly. Everything in him felt hollow. The next morning, he walked into the courtroom on autopilot. His clerk asked for notes. He nodded absently. He went through the motions, bench, robe, proceedings, but his mind wasn't in the room. It was somewhere at 30,000 feet. Replaying the moment Nova asked Liana for cookies like it was just another Tuesday. Watching Zion balance his iPad and walk like he had somewhere important to be. Seeing Nia wear sunglasses like she ran the world. Malik found himself wishing they knew his name. That they knew he was more than absence. But he wasn't. He had forfeited his place in their lives the moment he closed the door and didn't turn around. That night, he opened a blank email, then closed it. He tried again. Typed, "Subject, I saw you," then deleted it. On the third try, he stared at the blinking cursor for nearly an hour before finally typing something that didn't sound like weakness masquerading as concern. But everything felt too small. What could he even say? "I'm sorry?" Too late. "I miss you?" Not as right. "I was wrong?" Absolutely, but truth didn't undo consequence. He closed the laptop and sat in silence. Malik, the man who could deliver verdicts with surgical precision, couldn't form a sentence to the woman he once promised to love, because he had already judged her, before the world ever did. And she, unapologetically, undeniably, proved him wrong. Malik wrote the first email 3 days after the encounter on the tarmac. He stared at it for hours before pressing send. Subject, "You looked well." Message, "I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, but if you ever want to talk, I'm here." He received no reply. The second email came a week later. Subject, "No agenda. Just honesty." Message, "I saw you with them. I wasn't ready then. I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know I think about what I lost every single day." Still nothing. The third came after he watched a recorded interview she'd done for a tech inclusion summit. She sat on a panel with 3 other women, speaking about community-first infrastructure and digital fairness. Her answers were clear, strategic, unshaken. When the moderator asked, "What was your biggest challenge as a founder?" she simply said, "Being dismissed before I could be heard." Malik sent another message. Subject, "I did that." Message, "You said something today that hit me like a mirror. I dismissed you, and I see now that I didn't just walk away from a woman. I walked away from a force. I'll carry that mistake forever." This time, her inbox stayed silent for 2 full weeks. Then, one morning, a package arrived at Liana's office. No return address. Just a cream envelope tucked inside. It wasn't typed. It was written in blue ink, longhand. No opening pleasantries. Just this: "Liana, you don't owe me anything. Not a response, not a reaction, not even recognition. But I owe you the truth. I was a coward. I chose the path that seemed clean, not the one that was real. I let fear dress itself as strategy. I let ambition pretend to be wisdom. And I stood by as the best thing in my life walked into motherhood without me. I've read every article, seen every headline. None of them say my name. And that's what I earned. But when I saw you, with them, walking like the whole world was yours, I realized you didn't just move on. You elevated, and I was too small to walk beside you. I thought I was building something important when I left. But what you've built, that's legacy. I can't fix what I broke, but I hope you know that what you became, it humbles me. Malik." Liana read the letter once, then again. She didn't cry. She didn't sigh. She didn't forward it to anyone. Instead, she took a silver frame from her drawer, one that had been empty for months, and slid the letter inside, then placed it on the shelf above her desk, next to a photo of the kids in matching pajamas, and the first wireframe sketch of Phoenix Tech, not as a memento of him, but as a reminder that silence has weight, and so does choosing peace over response. She never replied, but every morning, as she sat at her desk, checked numbers and reviewed growth charts, that letter sat in the corner of her vision, not as an invitation, but as evidence that when you walk away from someone before their story begins, you might miss the chapters that rewrite history. The Judiciary Tech Committee met in a marbled conference hall inside a federal annex on Pennsylvania Avenue, a polished room filled with policymakers, judges, developers, and equity advocates. Liana Monroe didn't just belong there. She owned the moment the second she walked through the doors. Her red blazer turned heads, not because it screamed, but because it didn't whisper. Her presence wasn't loud. It was intentional. She moved like a woman who knew what she brought to the room. Her team followed close behind. Kendra handed her a portfolio. Aaliyah prepped the presentation slides. No one spoke unnecessarily. The room already knew who she was. Across the hall, Malik sat near the head of the table, flipping through briefing notes. His black pen tapped lightly against his pad, betraying the stillness in his face. He hadn't seen her since the letter, not since the jet. He didn't know if she'd read his words, didn't know if she'd crumpled the envelope or passed it to her assistant. But when she stepped into the room, he knew. She had read every word. She just didn't need to say so. Liana took her seat at the other end of the conference table, unbothered, collected. She offered a short nod to the panel moderator and waited for the session to begin. The topic, AI bias in judicial decision-making. Liana's contribution? A new tool her team had developed, an AI fairness checker designed to flag patterns of racial and gender disparity in sentencing algorithms used across digital case management systems. The committee buzzed. One senator asked, "How do we know your platform doesn't introduce its own bias?" Liana replied smoothly, "Because it doesn't guess, it listens. We don't predict behavior, we audit patterns. Data doesn't lie, it only reflects what's built into it." Another panelist leaned in. "So you're saying the problem isn't the technology, it's the assumptions baked into the system?" Liana met her gaze. "Exactly. And if we don't check the assumptions, we're not innovating, we're just automating injustice." Malik watched from across the table, not as a man, but as a student. This woman, who had once held his hand and cried in the dark of their apartment, asking him to choose her, was now briefing the judiciary on how to correct the very system he'd once thought was untouchable. He didn't speak until the Q&A was nearly over. The moderator opened the floor to final questions. Malik raised a hand slightly, just enough to be acknowledged, not enough to assert. "Ms. Monroe," he began, his voice even. "Have you tested your tool in courts where AI-supported sentencing is currently in use?" She didn't blink. "Several," she said. "In 2 states, it flagged statistically significant disparities in conviction to sentence timelines, disparities that aligned consistently with race and gender. Once reviewed manually, the data held up. No anomalies, just patterns." Malik nodded. "Impressive," he said, quietly. She offered a polite smile. It wasn't built to impress. It was built to prevent harm. Silence lingered for half a second. And in that space, something passed between them. Not nostalgia, not pain, recognition. She had become everything he once feared would ruin him. And she did it without needing him at all. When the panel concluded, applause rippled across the room. As attendees packed up, Malik walked toward her, not with urgency, but with the solemnity of a man who knew better than to mistake proximity for access. She was zipping her folio when he approached. "Liana." She looked up slowly. Her expression was unreadable, neither cold nor warm. Just finished. "Your children must be proud," he said. "They are," she answered. A pause. "But I'm prouder." "Of me?" She didn't soften the moment, didn't fill the silence. She let the words stand untouched. Malik exhaled through his nose, nodded once. No rebuttal, no request, no apology this time. Just silence that finally fit the weight of the moment. She stepped past him, heels clicking with steady rhythm, her team flanking her like proof of every decision she'd made. And Malik remained behind, shoulders square, heart a little heavier, understanding what it meant to lose something that never needed to be saved. It started as a whisper. Then came the headlines. Was that Liana Monroe and federal judge Malik Harrington in the same room? Former couple or just colleagues? Phoenix Tech CEO stays silent on rumored past with influential judge Liana didn't flinch. She'd been here before, though never from this angle. Once, she was the name left out of the story. Now, she was the headline. But she had no interest in feeding the speculation. She didn't respond to the media, didn't grant interviews about the encounter, didn't so much as repost the panel video, because silence was no longer something forced upon her. It was something she chose. Her team, loyal as ever, shielded her from noise. When a junior staffer asked if the rumors were true, Kendra simply said, "What matters is where she's going, not where she's been." Still, the questions came. In comments, in emails, even in quiet conversations after speaking engagements. But the curiosity didn't rattle Liana, because she'd already settled the answer. She'd forgiven Malik a long time ago, not because he deserved it, but because she refused to carry his failure in her bloodstream. She couldn't be everything her children needed and still live shackled to bitterness. So, she released him, not with a conversation, not with a door left open, but with a quiet internal decision that sounded a lot like peace. One morning, she sat for an interview with a magazine covering women in tech. Halfway through, the interviewer shifted awkwardly. "I hope this isn't too personal, but is it true you built Phoenix Tech while raising 4 children alone?" Liana smiled gently. "It's true. Did you have support?" She considered the question. "I had belief in myself, and eventually in a vision big enough that people started offering support when I stopped asking for permission." The interviewer paused, visibly moved. "If there's one thing you want the world to understand about your story, what would it be?" Liana looked down for a moment, then back up. Steady. "That love doesn't always come in the package you expect. Sometimes it looks like struggle. Sometimes it walks out on you. And sometimes," she glanced toward the photo on her desk of her 4 children in superhero capes, "it shows up in ways that make you stronger than you ever planned to be." The quote spread fast, not because it was viral, but because it was real, authentic, earned. That evening, she sat with her children on the floor, building a block castle while the twins argued over turrets. Zion turned to her with the directness only an 8-year-old could pull off. "Mama, did someone try to hurt your feelings today?" She blinked. "No, baby." "Why?" "Because you looked really calm, but your eyes were doing that thing where they look strong and tired at the same time." Liana laughed softly. "You watch me too closely." He shrugged. "I'm just checking." She leaned in and kissed his forehead. "No one can hurt me unless I let them. And I don't let them." That night, after bedtime stories and lights out, She sat alone at her desk and opened the drawer. The framed letter still sat there. She took it out, read it once more, slowly. Every word still stung, but none of it controlled her. She whispered to herself, "I forgive you. But I didn't do it for you." And she placed it back in the drawer, face down this time. Not because she was angry, because she had outgrown needing the reminder. The next morning, her phone buzzed with a message from a journalist. They were working on a long-form podcast episode featuring women founders who overcame personal trauma while building multi-million-dollar companies. "We'd love to include your voice, especially about how you rose past public betrayal and built something that changed lives." Liana declined, not out of pride, but because she knew now, real healing doesn't always need to be told through someone else's microphone. Some stories weren't meant to be used for sympathy. They were meant to be lived through and then lived beyond. The only public statement she ever made, about love, about loss, about leaving behind what no longer fit, came 6 weeks later during a conference in Chicago. A young woman in the audience asked, "What fueled you the most during your darkest seasons?" Liana didn't hesitate. "Being told I was too black, too female, too pregnant to matter. They were wrong. I built a billion-dollar company with 4 children at my hip and no man by my side. That's not revenge. That's justice." The room stood, not in applause, in agreement, because her life had become the proof. And Malik, wherever he sat that day, if he saw the clip, if he heard the words, he'd understand one thing clearly. She hadn't moved on from him. She had simply moved upward. And forgiveness? It didn't mean circling back. It meant never needing to. The Eiffel Tower glowed golden in the Parisian dusk, its light flickering like a breath in the clouds. Liana stood by the window of her suite, robe tied at the waist, tea in hand. The children were in the next room, scattered across a plush bed, watching a cartoon dubbed in French and half understood with wide, laughing eyes. It was the first vacation she took just for herself. No panel, no tech summit, no fundraising brunch, just living. She hadn't planned it. Her team surprised her with it after Phoenix Tech cleared a major licensing deal overseas. Kendra had pushed the button. "You talk about rest. Now take some." And she did. She chose Paris. Not because it was romantic, because it was slow. She needed that. For so long, her days were built in blocks, baby feeding, debugging lines of code, investor calls, pediatrician checkups, late-night server patches. But now, she carved time just for her. Mornings in Paris started with warm croissants from a bakery below their flat. The kids called it the chocolate bread place. Afternoons were spent in quiet museums and noisy gardens. Evenings belonged to her. One evening, she walked alone, past the cafes, past the lovers, past the violinist playing something soft in the corner of the street. And for the first time, she didn't wonder what it would have felt like to walk that street with someone. She had herself. She had enough. Later that night, she journaled, not on her laptop, with ink. "I didn't fall back in love with life. I remembered it was always waiting for me." She paused, then added, "And I was always worth it." She flipped back to earlier pages, written in earlier years. Notes that once carried frustration, financial stress, loneliness, exhaustion. Now, the tone had changed. There were notes about Nova's imagination, Nia's quiet strength, Zion's curiosity, Zeke's joy. Notes about team wins, unexpected gratitude, peaceful mornings. One entry simply read, "I looked in the mirror and smiled today, not because I needed to, but because I meant it." That was romance too. It wasn't red roses and sunset dinners. It was being proud of who looked back at you when the makeup came off. In Paris, she bought herself a ring, not for her finger, but a delicate chain she hung around her neck. The gem was small, understated, a muted garnet, but it symbolized a promise, not to prove anything, not to anyone, but to herself, that she would never again abandon the woman she became for the comfort of who she used to be. Back in Atlanta, the apartment was still modest, though larger now. She could have moved into a penthouse, bought a gated estate. She didn't, because her joy wasn't about altitude. It was about alignment. The kitchen remained the same, kids' drawings on the fridge, schedules pinned beside grocery lists. But her heart had changed. She danced while cooking, sang off-key with her kids, went to sleep without anxiety gnawing at her. One morning an envelope arrived. No return address. Inside was a photo, one taken from a public event. She was mid-speech, hand gesturing with conviction, mouth open mid-sentence. On the back, someone had written, "You speak like you know the world will listen. That's rare. Keep going." There was no name, but she knew. She didn't frame it. She didn't burn it. She slid it into a drawer, behind other things she no longer needed. And that was the final release. She didn't owe Malik hatred, and she didn't owe him space. She had other things to carry, like Zion's math homework, and Nova's science project, and her own growing curiosity about painting. Yes, painting. She took it up in small bursts. Watercolors. At first, everything bled too quickly, but then she leaned into it. The imperfection became the beauty, and each page told a different story. Sometimes her kids joined. Other times she sat on the balcony, brush in hand, canvas half finished. She never tried to sell them. They weren't for sale. They were love letters to a woman who kept choosing herself, even when it was inconvenient, even when it was lonely, even when it was quiet. And in those moments, that was the romance, not in being wanted, but in no longer needing permission to be full. The news broke quietly. Phoenix Tech had closed a Series B funding round at a $1.1 billion valuation. No fireworks, no press conference, just a press release, a quiet LinkedIn post, and a line of code pushed live by Aaliyah from a home office in Chicago. That was how Liana liked it. No spotlights, no parades, just progress. She was in Oakland when it happened, hosting a pop-up tech lab in a repurposed library. The kids were playing tag among the beanbags while a group of teen girls huddled over laptops running Phoenix's bias detection plugin. One of them looked up and asked, "Miss Liana, do you ever get tired of proving people wrong?" She smiled gently. "I'm not proving anything anymore. I'm just building what they thought I couldn't." Across the country, Malik read the headline in a courtroom hallway during recess. Phoenix Tech joins the billion-dollar club. Founder remains grounded in purpose. His breath caught. Not from shock, from clarity. He no longer felt bitterness. Just weight. Not of loss, but of truth. He now quoted her research in sentencing reform panels, cited her algorithms in legal memos, mentioned Phoenix Tech tools when training junior clerks on digital impartiality. He'd never work beside her, but her fingerprints were on the future he now helped shape. He carried the echo of her name in his chest, not as an ache, but as a reminder of where courage begins. One day a colleague asked him, "You ever met her?" He paused, smiled faintly, and said, "Once," but that wasn't quite true. He had met her twice. Once as the girl he couldn't fight for, and again as the woman who didn't need him to. Back in Atlanta, Liana launched a new initiative, Coder, a tech incubator exclusively for mothers re-entering the workforce. The mission was simple. We don't teach survival. We teach systems. Then we help you rewrite them. She funded it entirely from Phoenix Tech's profits. The first class graduated within 6 months. 12 women. Most of them once told they were too distracted, too inexperienced, too old. Now, they were CTOs, founders, consultants, engineers. Some of them hired others. Others hired themselves. And when they crossed the stage to accept their certificates, the kids handed them flowers. Nova handed one bouquet to a woman with tears in her eyes and whispered, "My mama says you're a builder now." The woman cried harder. Liana stood off stage, arms folded, eyes glistening, not from pride alone, but from the quiet knowledge that she hadn't just healed. She had helped others do it too. A year later, she was asked to sit down for a legacy interview. One of those long-form, archive-style profiles meant for libraries, universities, and future classrooms. The producer asked, "If someone watches this decades from now, what do you want them to know about your story?" Liana took a breath. "Everyone talks about the part where I was left, the pain, the babies, the poverty. And yeah, it was all real. I didn't imagine it. I bled through it. I cried in silence. I broke quietly. But that's not my story." She looked straight into the lens. "My story is this. I took the pieces. I built something that wouldn't exist without that heartbreak. I built it so well people stopped asking about who hurt me and started asking how they could build with me." She paused. "Pain doesn't give you purpose. Choice does. You don't become powerful just because you're hurt. You become powerful when you decide not to stay small." The crew was silent. When the recording ended, they clapped, not for the soundbite, but for the truth. That night, back home, the kids were already asleep. The living room was filled with the gentle hum of quiet, just the tick of the wall clock and the faint rustle of leaves outside the balcony. Liana sat on the floor, back against the couch, sketching in her notebook. A floor plan for a new facility, a timeline, a dream. She glanced at the shelf. The framed letter from Malik was still there, though now placed behind family photos and school crafts. Not hidden, just distanced, like a brick in the foundation, useful, but no longer visible. She smiled, then turned the page and wrote 3 words at the top. Next, Global Labs. She capped her pen, switched off the light, and whispered into the dark, "I'm not done." And somewhere in the stillness of the twilight, her children's breathing harmonized like a promise. They didn't need to be saved. They had a map now, written in her walk, etched in her choices, and lit by the justice she created out of love. What would you do if someone walked away from you, only to return when you no longer needed them? Would you open the door? Would you let silence be your answer? Or would you, like Liana, turn your pain into power? Tell us in the comments, have you ever been underestimated and turned it into your greatest comeback? If Liana's story moved you, if you believe in love, legacy, and justice, hit that like button, share this with someone rebuilding, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that stir the soul and heal the heart. At Love and Twilights, we don't just tell stories. We remind you, you were never the weakness. You were always the reason they feared your strength.